years now, cadre deployment has been criticised for allegedly putting incompetent and unqualified people in critical positions of government across the African continent. Well, locally, the ANC has been accused of using the system for placement of party loyalists in public service and state-owned enterprises. This was flagged by some opposition parties as one of the primary drivers of state capture. For more on this, we're joined by Professor William Gumede, author of Restless Nation. Professor Gumede, good afternoon. Thanks for speaking to us. That summary that I outlined earlier, does that define what cadre deployment is all about?
No, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm grateful. Cadre deployment is essentially a ruling party or governing party only appointing its cadres, its members to key positions in government, in business, and, giving them contracts and their companies contracts and giving them business licenses and so on. Now, across the African continent, since the Second World War, many African liberation and independence movements implemented their strategy. And that strategy of appointing only your members and your supporters in key positions in the public service, and also, give them contracts and business license and so on, has led to state failure in many countries, the collapse of the states of many African countries. It has led even to civil war, where, after long periods, those who were excluded actually took up arms and, coups were staged in response to that. And of course, also, it has caused a lack of development in many African countries.
So you've expressed one side of the view, which is the appointment of unqualified and inexperienced individuals to key positions. But there's the other side to the coin, which is that argument that is proffered by the ANC, where they say the ANC maintains that in a merit civil service system, political appointees and the leaders of positions are necessary for ensuring responsiveness to policy objectives and expediting service delivery. Your comments?
Yeah. Now, let me tell you, in modern times, last 100 years, nowhere in the world in the public service has a cadre system worked in the public service. So we can actually divide the countries that have done well out from poverty and underdevelopment to becoming wealthy the last 100 years. The one thing that stands out across the world is the idea of merit-based appointments, at least in the public service. Even in China, so China has certainly the most extensive cadre system to the Chinese Communist Party. But let me tell you, in the public service, it's absolutely merit-based. Every year, there's an open call in China for people to enter the public service. And when there's an open call, you go for an exam, and only the top people enter the public service. Even in the former Soviet Union, before its breakup, it was a merit-based system, at least in the public service. So one could actually divide the countries, the developing countries since the Second World War that failed, use cadre systems in the public service, and those who've succeeded since the Second World War, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, they've used merit-based in the public service.
Now, it would appear that the ANC is employing, the use of merit based on who's done the most to get a particular position. But what if the ANC employed or seconded cadres that were qualified? I'm sure that amongst the multitude of ANC members, there are those that have studied and are experienced and are extremely capable individuals. What if those individuals were deployed?
No, absolutely. You could have, you can have a merit system, of course, within an affirmative action, within empowerment. You can do that also. Countries have done that. Mauritius, for example, what they've done, they've introduced an affirmative action for disadvantaged communities, but within a merit system. So in the disadvantaged community, you get people on merit, not on political connections, or not based on the fact that they have struggle credentials. So that could have worked, because that's sort of a middle way. In Singapore, very, very fascinatingly, they've also got a cadre system. The People's Action Party of Singapore is also an independence movement, and it's the world's most successful independence movement in government. Most successful, as no one has equaled the party, but they've got a cadre system. And you know how it works, how the cadre system works? Their cadre system is to go and look for people who were not members of the party, not supporters of the party, but who are talented, to get them in. So, what they've done is they've tried to get non-members even to the leadership of their own party, to their own National Executive Committee. So they've used a cadre system to look for the best people, mostly 90% plus non-members of the party and non-supporters.
So it's almost a recruitment of sorts, where they recruit individuals that are diligent to the party and then place them.
No, the individuals who just have the competency, but they may not like the party and not support the party. That's the critical thing. The Chinese cadre system does the same. They don't really care whether you're a member of the party in the public service, unless you get right to the top of the party leadership. But what they're looking for, that you are the top person in the country. And if you're that person in the country, they get you into the public service. So what I'm saying is, in terms of, you have to think, in terms of the way development works, is that, it's not the money that makes a country, that radically transform a country from poverty to wealth, but is the human capital. And that's a critical, the reason why African countries have failed the last 100 years is they are not prioritizing human capital. So you get your talented people in your country, you get them in the key positions, no matter if they support you as a governing party, that's not an issue, because the issue is always the national interest of the country. And in East Asian developmental states, and what we call the developmental states, or the East Asian tigers, the miracle economies, what they did, but it was different to African countries and other developing countries, they use merit across the society. So often the whole public service, most probably maybe 5% of a public service, say in Singapore or in South Korea, would be party members. 90+% would be non-party members, but they are the most competent people in the country.
Now, if we go back 27 or 28 years, the issue for the ANC was, how do they protect the interests of the government without the prospect of employing individuals that would sabotage the ANC and the government whilst in positions of authority?
No, I understand. I mean, that's a legitimate argument. And I remember reporting on that argument at the time. When I was a reporter for the Sunday Independent and the Star, because that was 94. There was the argument made very, very legitimately. But the problem is, and even then we pointed, and I myself pointed this out to the ANC leadership. This is so in 1994, when the transformation started of the public services, to say, look, learn the lessons of all of the failed African countries by appointing, if you want to transform the public service, appoint the best people in the country, whether they support you or not. If what do we want to do as a country? We want to grow, we want to create jobs, we want to develop, we want to deliver services. Does it matter which party you are? Does it matter what color you are? But what matters most is that you're competent, that you love the country, that you're patriotic about the country, that you want to make a difference. You should be appointed and to change things.
Well, how does cadre deployment impact good governance on the one front, and then on the other lead to acts of corruption?
So the moment when you just appoint your own members, firstly, those members and supporters that you appoint, if you don't appoint them on competence, and that's unfortunately, the ANC made exactly the same mistake that ZANU-PF did, MPLA did in Angola, what the Tanzanian ruling party did, what the Algerian liberation movement did, appointing people only on the basis of their struggle credentials, not on the competence. I mean, that really was the first problem. So a cadre deployment that did not look at competence, which has been the African scenario the last 100 years, as I said here. Now, what it means immediately, people are then not accountable to the public. They're not accountable to the Constitution. They're not accountable to the public service ethos. They're accountable to the party. So even if they do wrong, if they're corrupt, if they don't deliver, if they're incompetent, no one can do anything about them because they can't be disciplined, they can be fired because only the party can fire them. But if they are senior people in the party, they're not going to be fired. So that's really the first thing. So that's where we then begin to feel a lack of service delivery because no one can be held accountable. If you Joe Public and you report a person in the public service who's a cadre deployment, that person can't be fired because that person has a direct line to the ANC leadership. The person is going to be protected. Yeah. Secondly, just in terms of, if you think about our public service, a lot of our services are contracted out through procurement. A lot of services are delivered through procurement. Now, if you, in cadre procurement, all of the procurement that government tenders to deliver services are given to cadres. You have to be connected to the party. Now, in many cases, the cadres just set up a company with no experience, and then they try to deliver. They cut corners, of course. That is why we've seen service delivery failures across the country. Hospitals not working because somebody doesn't even deliver, you don't deliver the things that should be delivered because you don't have the capacity. Or you try to front, maybe a company of somebody who's not connected, a company delivers. So it becomes, immediately firstly, it's not only a lack of public service delivery, but it's also corruption. Now it becomes a corruption issue also at the same time.
Now, Professor Gumede, the ANC has taken an absolute hammering for cadre deployment. Has it all been failure? Are there instances where we can talk about, the ANC appointed a cadre in this particular SOE or this arm of government, and this was a success story?
The success stories hasn't been that numerous. You can put it on one's the fingers. What do they call it? The fingers of your hands and so on. I mean, really, the reason why at a municipal level, why most of our municipalities have failed, why public service have failed, really is cadre deployment is a really, really big part of it. The other thing about cadre deployment, really what it does is it gives a perception to society out there that if you're not connected to the ANC, maybe if you don't have the same color as the people in the ANC and so on, that the state is not for you. And so on. So what it does is it undermines social cohesion. Now, social cohesion is the feeling in a country where different communities feel they're part of the country, they're South African, we're all part of this country. Now, the moment you exclude so many others with the skills and with the competence, what it means is people feel they're not part of this country. Whether some people immigrate or they just say, well, actually, you know what, I'm going to do my own thing. I'm not connected to the country. And for countries to work, any country to work, you need to have this sense of community. We're all part of it. We're all together, and so on. And that's one of the reasons why we don't have the sense of togetherness and South Africanness in the country, because people feel excluded. And then, of course, our skills immigrate. Now, related to that, for development to happen successfully in any country, there has to be almost a good energy. People must feel confident. People must feel excited. To spend their money, to make the investment, to build factories, come up with new ideas, and so on. Now, when you exclude people with that energy. You exclude people with the ideas and the skill sets and who could have made a difference, and they go to other countries and they go make the difference in those other countries. And that is why often when countries fail, it fails because, cadre deployment breaks the energy of a society, makes people hopeless, and they feel, you know what, Nobody's interested in my skill set. Nobody's interested in my money. Nobody's interested in my ideas. I might as well quit.
Professor Gumede, author of Restless Nation, making sense of troubled times, trying to make sense of the impact of cadre deployments, and according to Professor Gumede, it makes absolutely no sense.